If you've lived in Kansas for a long time, there's a good chance you've passed places where entire towns once existed without ever realizing it. Across this state are communities that disappeared, towns people believed would last forever, and places tied to stories that still don't sound real today. These are 13 ghost towns in Kansas, and number 1 is the kind of place you never forget once you hear what happened there. Number 13, Lecompton, Kansas. In 1857, pro-slavery men gathered in a small brick building in Lecompton, Kansas, and wrote a constitution that would have forced Kansas into the Union as a slave state. With a voting system so rigged that it didn't matter how people voted, slavery was protected either way. Over 3,000 fraudulent ballots were documented. The fraud split the Democratic Party so severely it ran 3 separate presidential candidates in 1860, handing the election to a relatively unknown Illinois lawyer named Abraham Lincoln. A debate over this constitution in Congress became a late-night brawl where one congressman's toupee was ripped off in the chaos. All of it started in a building still standing on a residential street in a Kansas town of 600 people. Lecompton had been the territorial capital since 1855, headquarters of the pro-slavery faction in Bleeding, Kansas, Missouri border ruffians crossing into Kansas to stuff ballot boxes, free state leaders imprisoned in Lecompton's own jail. The fake choice baked into the Lecompton Constitution was in the fine print. Voting without slavery still protected the approximately 200 enslaved people already in the territory. Free state supporters boycotted. The tally came back 6,226 in favor, with 569 opposed, and subsequent investigation found over 3,000 fraudulent votes. President Buchanan endorsed it anyway. The debate broke the Democratic Party, elevated Lincoln, and by the time Kansas entered the Union as a free state in January 1861, the country was days from war. Today, Constitution Hall is open for tours in a quiet river town of 600. You can walk the floors where the fraud was committed and understand that what most people call the start of the Civil War, Fort Sumter, April 1861, was not where it actually began. Number 12, Nicodemus, Kansas. In 1877, formerly enslaved families left Kentucky with almost nothing and walked the final 35 miles across the open Kansas prairie to reach a town that didn't fully exist yet. Their first winter, some survived by selling buffalo bones off the ground. Their second spring, they planted crops. By 1887, Nicodemus had a hotel, a newspaper, 2 general stores, 3 churches, and 700 residents. Then 3 separate railroad companies surveyed the area. 3 separate surveys, and every single one chose a route that bypassed the town. The community that had survived everything fell apart over the next 100 years. It is still there. It is the only surviving western town founded by black settlers after the Civil War. Nicodemus was organized by a city promoter named W.R. Hill and a preacher named Reverend Simon Roundtree, with Benjamin Pap Singleton, a formerly enslaved carpenter who called himself the Moses of the Colored Exodus, spreading the word across the South. The first settlers arrived to find no buildings and spent that first winter in dugouts carved from the earth, surviving partly because the Osage Nation brought them food and firewood. The town became a centerpiece of the Exoduster movement, the great migration of Black Americans out of the South after Reconstruction collapsed and staying became increasingly dangerous. But in 1888, those 3 railroad companies looked at Nicodemus and all chose to go around it. Without rail access, the town couldn't compete, and the population drained away steadily for the next century. Today, about 16 people live in Nicodemus. The National Park Service maintains 5 original buildings as a National Historic Site, and every July, the descendants of the founders return for the Emancipation Homecoming, a tradition over 100 years old in a town the country mostly forgot. Number 11, Silkville, Kansas. A French aristocrat exiled by Napoleon III for his socialist politics bought 3,500 acres of Kansas prairie in 1869, built a 60-room chateau, planted thousands of mulberry trees, and spent 2 decades trying to prove that cooperative silk farming could outlast capitalism. His silk won prizes at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. Cheaper Asian imports destroyed the market anyway. He gave everything, 3,100 acres, 9 stone buildings, the whole operation, to an orphanage, and went home to die. Ernest Valeton de Boissière believed deeply in the utopian philosophy of Charles Fourier, that cooperative communities could eliminate poverty and competition. Napoleon III didn't appreciate the politics and suggested he leave France, which eventually led him to Kansas. In 1869, he started building. The chateau was the largest private residence in Kansas, with a library of 2,500 books and a communal dining hall. He brought French experts in silk cultivation, imported reeling machines, built a silk cocoonery, and planted the mulberry groves the silkworms needed. In 1876, the silk was shown in Philadelphia and internationally praised. It wasn't enough. Chinese and Japanese silk came in cheaper than anything Silkville could produce. Workers kept leaving for higher wages or their own homestead land. De Boissière tried cheese, butter, cattle. Nothing replaced the silk economy. In 1892, at 82, he returned to France for the last time, deeding everything to the Odd Fellows for an orphanage. He died in 1894. Today, a few stone outbuildings survive near Williamsburg, and where the mulberry groves once grew, there is nothing. Number 10. Octagon City, Kansas. Hasten, you lovers of carrots, you eaters of unbolted grain. That was the newspaper ad Henry Clubb placed across the eastern United States in 1855, recruiting settlers for Octagon City, a vegetarian abolitionist utopia in Kansas where every building would be octagonal, every road would radiate from an octagonal town square, and life would be organized around moral purity and geometric harmony. About 60 families responded. When they arrived in 1856, the only structure was a windowless 16 by 16 foot log cabin. The full design would have featured 64 octagonal farmhouses with octagonal barns across 4 square miles, drawn from phrenologist Orson Squire Fowler's theory that octagonal buildings promoted more natural light, lower costs, and better health. The reality was a dried-up spring, mosquitoes, disease, and 60 families sharing a single cabin in the Kansas heat. When not enough vegetarians could be recruited, the organizers had quietly opened membership to meat eaters. The promised grist mill and sawmill were never built. Most settlers left within the summer of 1856. The octagonal buildings were never constructed, and the site left no physical trace. In 2007, an 85-year-old local historian who had spent 15 years and $415 of his own money maintaining a small memorial finally gave up after repeated vandalism. The last physical markers for Octagon City are gone. Number 9. Quindaro, Kansas. Right now, buried in a hillside in Kansas City, Kansas, are the ruins of one of the most radical anti-slavery communities ever built in America. A port town founded in 1857 specifically, so freedom seekers crossing Missouri didn't have to pass through pro-slavery territory to reach free land. It was burned in the Civil War, resettled by a black community after it, home to a historically black university until 1943, and then gradually built over. The ruins are still there if you know where to look. Quindaro was founded by a coalition of anti-slavery activists, Wyandotte Nation members who had been relocated to Kansas, and New England Free State settlers who needed a Missouri River port that bypassed pro-slavery Missouri crossings. It grew fast. Hotels, warehouses, several thousand residents, a newspaper, and a documented underground railroad crossing point for people moving from Missouri into free territory. The Civil War destroyed it. The town burned and was abandoned by the late 1860s. A black community rebuilt on the same hillside, and Western University, one of the first historically black universities west of the Mississippi, operated there from 1865 until 1943. Today, a preservation effort is fighting to keep the buried 1857 town site from being permanently erased by urban development, which is about the most fitting final threat imaginable for a town that was built specifically to stand against Missouri. Number 8. Ellinwood, Kansas. Beneath the streets of Ellinwood, Kansas, there is a network of tunnels German settlers built in 1887, 2 blocks long under Main Street, sealed in the 1940s, still containing a barber's chair, antique mirrors, original saloon equipment, and the artifacts of a working frontier commercial district that has been sitting untouched for 80 years. Ellinwood still has 2,000 residents, so it doesn't technically qualify as a ghost town. But what is underground qualifies as something. The passages were practical from the start, basement businesses connected to neighboring basements along the Santa Fe Trail, providing shelter from Kansas heat, storms, and eventually Prohibition bootlegging. During World War I, they also served as shelters. When historians rediscovered the tunnels in the 1980s after 40 years of disuse, the barber shop was still set up for customers, the bar was still stocked, and everything was exactly where it had been left. Today, the Ellinwood Underground runs guided tours through Young's Barber Shop, the original saloon spaces, and the connecting passages, the town above running on 2026, while the town below never left 1940. Number 7. Coronado Heights, Kansas. During the Depression, the federal government built a stone castle on a hilltop in central Kansas, a permanent multi-room structure with panoramic views for miles across the prairie. Not a fort, not a dam, not a power station, a castle. They built it because local legend said the Spanish explorer Coronado had camped on that exact hill in 1541 while searching for a mythical city of gold. Historians have never confirmed it. The Swedish farming community that had actually lived on those hills for decades got no monument at all. Swedish immigrants settled McPherson County in the 1870s, built churches, schools, and farms, and sustained a real community for decades. The Depression emptied it, families leaving for cities, farmland going quiet. The WPA arrived in 1936 with Depression-era labor and built the castle on the highest hill, justified by a legend that may be entirely fictional. The Swedish families who had farmed the land, raised their children there, and watched it all empty out were not considered worth commemorating. The castle is still there. On a clear day you can see for 30 miles from the top, and the fields where the Swedish community once lived stretch out below it, unmarked, as if nothing was ever there. If the stories of the places nobody talks about are why you watch this channel, drop a comment below and tell me what forgotten town in your state deserves to be on this list. Number 6. Dunlap, Kansas. Benjamin Pap Singleton was a formerly enslaved carpenter from Nashville who could not read or write and organized one of the largest voluntary migrations in American history. He personally founded 2 black settlements in Kansas. Number 1 was Nicodemus. Number 2 was Dunlap. 200 families from Tennessee on the old Kansas reservation land in Morris County in 1878. Most people who drive past the site today have no idea it exists. Singleton traveled the South with handfuls of printed circulars, recruiting families to Kansas by describing the freedoms that post-Reconstruction Southern states were methodically taking away. He helped bring tens of thousands of black Americans to Kansas in the late 1870s and testified before a U.S. Senate committee about why they were leaving the South. His testimony remains one of the most direct, first-hand accounts of what drove the Exodus migration. Dunlap was his most personal project. The 200 families who arrived in 1878 came to land the federal government had opened up after removing the Kansas people, and they farmed it with the focus of people who understood exactly what owning land meant. The town grew, functioned for decades, and then followed the railroad bypass path that ended so many Kansas communities. Today, a historical marker in Morris County marks where it was, and most drivers on the state highway have never stopped to read it. Number 5. Richfield, Kansas. Before the election even happened, the citizens of Richfield built a full courthouse, a proper 2-story stone building sitting ready for the county government to move in, because they were that confident. Then they lost the vote, the courthouse stood empty, and the county seat went to Elkhart. Today, Richfield has about 40 residents and the specific dignity of a town that bet everything on a vote and learned what frontier Kansas actually ran on. Morton County in the 1880s was the kind of sparse, remote corner of Kansas where county seat status meant everything. Lawyers, government offices, land offices, the economic engine of the whole county. Richfield organized, raised money, and built the courthouse as a statement of certainty. What they didn't fully account for was that even winning didn't always mean winning. During Morton County's county seat wars, rivals physically stole the county records in the middle of the night and transported them to another town, a standard tactic when legal challenges moved too slowly. The county seat changed hands repeatedly before Elkhart finally held it. The original courthouse is long gone. The story of the building built for a government that never arrived is still told by local historians in one of the most remote corners of Kansas, where the wind does the forgetting that time doesn't get to. Number 4. Clinton Lake Communities, Kansas. In 1977, the Army Corps of Engineers flooded the Wakarusa Valley south of Lawrence, Kansas to create Clinton Lake. Families who had farmed that land since before the Civil War were bought out under eminent domain, given what the government considered fair value, which in a rural Kansas valley in the 1960s was not much, and told to leave. The buildings were demolished or left to drown. In dry years, the lake drops and the old roads and foundations surface again. Most of the hundreds of thousands of annual visitors have no idea what is under the water. The Wakarusa Valley had been farmed since the 1850s. Small crossroads communities, churches, schools, families who had been on that land for generations. It was theirs. The Army Corps began eminent domain proceedings in the 1960s. Some families contested, most had no real choice. The valley was cleared, the dam was built, and the water rose. In drought years, the lake drops enough to reveal the old road grid, the farmstead foundations, and occasional artifacts. Kayakers paddle over the rooflines of demolished buildings still visible below the surface. Before the water came up, the church bell from the community of Bloomington was unhooked and rehung in a nearby church, where it still rings. One deliberate act of saving something before the government turned the valley into a reservoir. The recreation area that draws hundreds of thousands of visitors a year sits on land that families were told had a better use. Number 3. Buffalo, Kansas. Buffalo doesn't look like a ghost town at first. It looks like a town frozen in about 1890. An entire main street of 2-story limestone commercial buildings, most of them empty, slowly being reclaimed by weather and time. It is one of the largest concentrations of intact 19th century ghost town architecture anywhere in Kansas, and most people in the state have never heard of it. The town grew through the post-Civil War era into a real small city. Hotels, stores, a mill, a newspaper, enough commercial life to make it viable for decades. The railroads eventually reconfigured around it, the county's commercial center shifted, and the businesses closed one by one. What makes Buffalo unusual is what didn't happen next. Most Kansas towns at this stage were either redeveloped and erased, or so thoroughly abandoned that nothing structural survived. Buffalo was neither. It never had the money to tear down and rebuild, and enough people stayed that the buildings were maintained at just enough to keep them standing, never coming down, just getting older. Today, Buffalo has fewer than 300 residents and a main street that photographers and historians drive hours to see, not because of what happened there, but because of what is still there, stone and wood from the 1870s and 1880s, slowly becoming something else in plain sight on a Kansas County road. Number 2. Elk Falls, Kansas. Elk Falls calls itself the world's largest living ghost town, and the self-awareness behind that title is the whole point. About 100 people still live there. They have a 130-year-old iron bridge, a pottery studio, and an annual outhouse tour that draws visitors from across the country. They know the town is disappearing. They decided to make the disappearing worth watching. Most Kansas towns bypassed by the railroads just went quiet. Elk Falls did something different. Its remaining residents leaned into the ghost town identity instead of fighting it, turning the iron bridge, the pottery studio, and the outhouse tour into a genuine local economy built on the specific charm of a place that's been almost gone for a century. The bridge is a 1893 Pratt truss iron span across the Elk River, the oldest of its type still in use in Kansas, exactly as it was built. It is one of the few things in Elk Falls that has never needed reinventing. Number 1. Diamond Springs, Kansas. Diamond Springs was once the most important rest stop on the entire Santa Fe Trail, a clear spring that produced enough clean water to resupply entire wagon trains at almost exactly the last point on the route where travelers could count on reliable water before the exposed plains ahead. Thousands of wagons stopped here every year through the 1840s and 1850s. Today, there is a historical marker on a county road, a dry stream bed, and nothing else. The spring supported a trading post, a mail station, and a stage stop for 2 decades. Travelers who wrote about the Santa Fe Trail described Diamond Springs as the crossing point between the comfortable and the dangerous parts of the journey. The spring began failing in the late 1860s. Drought, overuse, the water table dropping as farming moved into the surrounding land. By the time the railroad arrived and made the trail itself obsolete, the spring that had justified Diamond Springs was already gone. The trading post closed, the mail service ended, and the site was abandoned. Today, a marker on the county road is easy to miss. The dry channel is visible only if you know what you're looking at, and the grass grows the same over the place where thousands of wagons once camped as it does everywhere else on the Kansas prairie. Diamond Springs disappeared so quietly that the absence is almost impossible to see. Drop a comment and tell me what town in Kansas we should cover next.